Sprawling specialist subjects, as they always are. I am Jennifer Byrne. Thanks for your company. Good night.
Tens of thousands of residents ordered into lockdown. Victoria takes drastic new measures to combat the rapid increase in coronavirus cases.
If we don't take these steps now, we will finish up in a situation of, rather than locking down 10 postcodes, we will be locking down every postcode.
Queensland moves to reopen borders next month to all states except Victoria. South Australia scraps its planned reopening. China passes new national security laws for Hong Kong. Is this the end of democratic freedoms? And extinction fears. A parliamentary inquiry finds only urgent intervention will save the koala.
This is SBS World News with Janice Petersen.
Good evening. In an unprecedented move, Victoria will impose lockdowns in suburban areas as coronavirus cases in Melbourne spiral out of control. Residents in areas designated local hotspots will be under stay-at-home orders for the next 4 weeks from midnight tomorrow. There were 64 cases confirmed in Victoria overnight, taking new cases in the state to 312 in the last 7 days. Most of them are community transmissions.
A stay-at-home order issued for hotspot suburbs across Victoria.
There will only be 4 reasons that you are permitted to leave your house, and only if you really have to. For work or school, for care or caregiving, for daily exercise, for food and other essentials.
14 consecutive days of double-digit increases in Victoria's virus tally, the latest batch all locally acquired. The Premier announcing from midnight tomorrow those living in 10 postcodes will be required to return to Stage 3 stay-at-home restrictions.
This is what we must do now. If we do not do this now, then I won't be locking down 10 postcodes, I will be locking down all postcodes.
The testing blitz so far uncovering 230 cases in just 3 suburbs. The Premier revealing almost 1,000 people have refused to be tested. World Health Organization infectious disease experts say targeted lockdowns are the only way to contain the spread.
It's a bit like a quarantine hotel. It has to have somebody there to ensure that those that live in the area or want to come and visit family and friends understand it's a no-go zone.
The Premier acknowledged that businesses in these hotspot areas are again likely to be taking a hit, announcing $5,000 worth of dedicated support for those eligible. The Premier also moved to reassure parents that school is on track to return as planned July 13.
You know, this is a heartbreaking turn in the epidemic, but these are the right public health actions and we know that they can work.
800 additional support staff from the Prime Minister's office have been sent to bolster testing crews.
The action being taken in Victoria is appropriate. This action is in line with the national approach of test, trace and respond. The actions being taken by the Victorian Government will save lives.
You are encouraging people to come over to Ulmarra Park.
Thousands canvass hotspots in Melbourne's northwest as the state tries to uncover as many cases as possible.
Someone knocked at the door and they were telling, regardless of you're sick or not, you should get tested. So I was thinking, yeah, why not?
For our safety and our family and for our community.
So it's a very good idea actually.
10 schools and 5 childcare centres have been locked down for cleaning in recent weeks, with students and staff testing positive. Local councils are calling for more in-language updates.
I've received calls of people who have been getting onto their satellite dish to get back home and watch the news in India to see coverage of updates of coronavirus in Australia.
New South Wales recording 5 new cases, all returned travellers. The Premier discouraging travellers from Victorian hotspots, but not moving to lock out the entire state.
That's what will keep us safe in New South Wales.
The Prime Minister throwing his support behind the suburb-wide lockdowns.
There are ways to mitigate the risks that are coming out of Victoria, And frankly, to resist all of Victoria makes little sense.
Police will patrol the hotspots subject of the lockdown orders, the Premier urging people to abide by the rules, saying the sooner we all do the right thing, the sooner we can beat this.
And our reporter Abby Dinham joins us now live from Brunswick West in Melbourne, one of the lockdown areas. Good evening, Abby. What's the reaction of residents there tonight?
Well, Janice, the people we've spoken to here in Brunswick West have generally been supportive of the move, but as they've only found out about it in the last couple of hours, there's a lot of uncertainty about how it's all going to work and how it's going to affect them, and also how it's going to be policed.
It's scary for us because we were looking forward to the improvement of the economy, improvement of everybody getting back to their social lives, and to have us on lockdown again is a bit of a dip in our mood.
I think it's unfortunate that it needs to happen, but I think it's great that Dan Andrews and the Victorian government have acted early.
So Brunswick West is just one of 36 suburbs that are the hotspots that will go into these lockdowns. Cafes and restaurants here will have to go back to only takeaway and delivery orders. Residents have only 4 reasons to leave their homes, and that includes going to work or school if they can't do it from home, exercise, caregiving and buying essential supplies. We're in the school holidays at the moment, and Daniel Andrews has said that anybody living in these hotspots who have holiday travel plans must cancel those. He also announced that there will be an inquest into the management of hotel quarantine in Victoria. We've had several clusters at the Melbourne facilities, and during that time he's asked the Prime Minister to divert international flights with return travellers on them away to other cities while that happens. So from midnight tomorrow night, police will begin patrolling the streets of these 36 suburbs to ensure that people are complying with the stay-at-home orders. Those who don't will be getting a fine, and that will continue for the next 4 weeks. Janice?
Thanks so much. That's Abby Dinham reporting from Brunswick West in Melbourne. Well, Queensland has finally delivered its long-awaited decision on reopening borders. Just hours after South Australia announced it was scrapping a planned reopening, Queensland says it will reopen from the 10th of July. Residents from all states and territories will be welcome, except Victoria.
An empty boat with nowhere to go. Business has been slow for the ferry to Moreton Island, a popular tourist destination off Brisbane.
We've had staff cuts. We're lucky enough to have some people on JobKeeper, and we could keep some staff, but it's a huge impact.
With Queensland's borders now due to open, that's all about to change. Today, Queensland's Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk delivered the highly anticipated news, with one significant condition.
Due to the current community transmission levels, the border with Victoria will remain closed and will be strengthened.
Queensland's border will reopen on July 10 to every state and territory except Victoria. All incoming travellers will need to sign a declaration stating they've not been in Victoria in the last 14 days. Those who provide false information on that declaration could face fines of up to $4,000. If Victorians still want to enter the state, they'll need to quarantine in a hotel for 14 days at their own expense. Pressure has been mounting on the Premier, who's faced legal action and intense political lobbying.
These border wars have got to stop, and I think a national leader should have been able to bring all of the states and territories together. Frankly, I'm a bit sick that Queensland has been singled out as opposed to South Australia and Tasmania, just to name a few.
Relief for the tourism industry, which still faces a long path to recovery.
Interstate tourism brings about $9 billion to Queensland. About 3/4 of that is from states other than Victoria. So we'll have an opportunity to make up some lost ground.
Equally concerned by Victoria's emergency, South Australia has scrapped a planned July 20 reopening.
It's likely that we will set a date for the removal of the borders with the ACT and New South Wales, but we'll now do that independent of that July 20th date.
Closure of the New South Wales border with Victoria is not being considered. The Premier saying complacency among the state's residents is a bigger danger.
As we continue to further ease restrictions, and given what's happened in Melbourne, that we have to be extra vigilant.
And reporter Stefan Armbruster joins us now live from Queensland State Parliament. Stefan, relief of course for tourism operators in Queensland, but how are residents reacting tonight?
Well, apart from the $6 billion that interstate tourists contribute to the Queensland economy, Queensland is looking forward to the resumption of family and social contacts. And with the stage 3 relaxations coming in on Friday, that means it will no longer be 20 people who can gather, but 100 for weddings, funerals and house parties. Also, there'll be a resumption of community sporting activities. People could buy a drink at the bar. The casinos will reopen, and sporting stadiums will be able to hold up to 50% of the capacity, or 25,000 people, whichever is a smaller number. And that of course could have implications for the Black Lives Matter rally, which is due to be held in Brisbane on Saturday. Janice?
Thanks so much. That's Stefan Armbruster updating us on the easing of restrictions in Queensland. Overseas now, and the worst is yet to come. That's the latest warning from the World Health Organization on the coronavirus pandemic. Today marks 6 months since the first cases were discovered in China. The number of infections now exceeds 10 million globally. The WHO is urging governments to keep up the fight as cases soar across the Americas and parts of Asia.
Ricardo Aguirre says he took every precaution but still contracted coronavirus. He survived, but 5 of his family members didn't.
We've been through hell and back.
The Arizona resident says Americans aren't taking the virus seriously, but the state governor now is.
Our expectation is that next week our numbers will be worse.
Arizona is the latest of 16 US states pushing or rolling back plans to reopen. California, Texas and Florida all reimposing some restrictions after a record spike in cases. Texas hospitals at near capacity.
We're seeing a daily dramatic increase, almost a vertical slope.
Long lines for tests in Florida where new cases are 6 times higher than a month ago. And in New York, which seemed to be over the worst, the governor now considering delaying a phase 3 reopening. Tweeting, "Wake up America, COVID is getting worse, not better." The White House is in denial. Andrew Cuomo also urging President Trump to make the wearing of face masks mandatory in public nationwide.
And let the president lead by example, and let the president put a mask on it.
He encourages people to make whatever decision is best for their safety.
The WHO calling on world leaders to keep on track and issuing this blunt warning.
The hard reality is this is not even close to being over.
Praising some for their handling of the pandemic while singling out others.
There's no question that Brazil is still facing a big challenge.
Even as Brazil recorded another 24,000 new cases. In Rio, more shops reopened their doors. The economy is now officially in recession there, exactly what President Jair Bolsonaro hoped to avoid when he rejected a nationwide lockdown. Economic woes prompting Mexico too to forge ahead with easing restrictions.
I've been without work for almost 4 months, and today's the first day that I rejoin activities. It's been a very heavy situation.
The country recorded nearly 500 additional deaths in the past 24 hours. Amelia Dunn, SBS World News.
Australia has shifted its defence posture, placing a greater emphasis on defending the nation against what the Prime Minister says are sophisticated state-sponsored cyber attacks. Scott Morrison will reveal further details, including new long-range missiles, in a major speech tomorrow as tensions with China continue to rise.
Flying into the picturesque snowy mountains, delivering the Prime Ministerial seal of approval.
The green light. The thumbs up, greens light. So we're on the go at Snowy 2.0. How are you, mate?
The federal government giving the final environmental sign-off for more than 40 kilometres of tunnels, which will form Australia's largest renewable energy project.
An engineer's dream. It really is.
And potentially one of the nation's largest targets for state-sponsored hackers.
These are the sorts of projects, these are the sorts of pieces of infrastructure which can be the target of cybersecurity attacks. And so it's important that we invest in protecting these assets.
The government reprioritising its defence budget, redirecting $1.35 billion over 10 years to the Cyber Enhanced Situational Awareness and Response Plan, including $470 million to recruit 500 cyber spies, $118 million to expand Australia's data science and intelligence capabilities, and $20 million for cybercrime research labs, the biggest cybersecurity investment in Australia's history.
If you can actually bring down someone's power grid, if you can bring down their water grid, if you can bring down the banking system, if you can shut down industry through cyber attacks, you don't need to go to war.
Cyber criminals can attack anywhere, anytime. Just ask the Australian National University Toll Logistics or TUI's, Furphy and Forex Beer.
For now, the focus is on defeating an enemy much closer to home, the coronavirus recession.
As works begin on one project, 4 days out from the Eden-Monaro by-election, Labor is far more concerned about the future of a different scheme.
How many jobs need to be lost before Scott Morrison will come clean on his secret plan for the JobKeeper payments?
There will be a next phase, and we are calibrating that next phase and targeting it.
While voters won't know what that means for another 3 weeks, Scott Morrison insists there's no endless pipeline of economic stimulus.
I mean, we have spent already, rightly, just shy of $50 billion in the last couple of months.
In the Snowy Mountains, Brett Mason, SBS World News.
Coming up next, local lockdown after Victoria's crackdown in Melbourne. We look at an English city which has been singled out. An Australian journalist testifies before a US congressional committee. Her harrowing story of being attacked by riot police. And hardships faced by international students. What happens when they seek fee reductions as lectures go online? A special report.
Tonight at 7:30, Julie Bishop discovers where her wanderlust comes from in a brand new episode of Who Do You Think You Are? Then we unpack the human need of belonging on Inside. Then at 9:30, a new season of Where Are You Really From?
How do you decide who gets to call Australia home?
Nobody should imagine that ministers make these decisions lightly.
Sorry, I'm getting emotional. In a brand new series, take an unprecedented look at those fighting for permanent residency.
You're cutting into someone's life.
Are we going to win? I don't know.
I'm just giving you a call to let you know a decision came in today.
Who Gets to Stay in Australia starts tomorrow 8:30 on SBS and on demand.
Harvey Norman has everything you need for your home, like the Aussie-made Berwick 3.5-seater with reversible chaise, 2-seater sofa and ottoman for only $1,999. The Bradford 3-seater sofa offers sophisticated style with all the creature comforts, like powered recliners, lights, USB charging and more, just $2,199. Featuring the natural beauty of Tasmanian oak, the Montrose 9-piece dining suite, $2,499. See more in store, now at Harvey Norman.
Go!
It's back, the ultimate cheesy garlic bread sub. Make your favourite sub inside hot, cheesy garlic bread. Give in to the ultimate cheesy garlic bread sub. Give in to fresh, give in to Subway.
Pay less every day at The Good Guys. Get up to 15% off a huge range of TVs, like $300 off this LG TV, $300 off this Hisense TV, plus bonus delivery and installation when you buy on interest-free. Only at The Good Guys.
My best piece of advice for consumers is...
don't buy it if you don't need it.
Do your homework. There's a lot of information out there. Some of it's not very good.
Read your instruction manuals.
Think hard about what you do and don't need. Realise that there are a lot of people out there who are trying to sell you something you don't need. And seek out those independent voices. Choice is one of those.
Become a Choice member. We can save you so much money, we can save you time, and we can save you heartache.
When you hear this chime, it means the SBS program you've started has audio description capabilities that can be turned on.
Michael Patillo hails down an approaching train.
Audio description fills in the gaps for people who are blind or vision impaired, so everyone can enjoy the full story.
Lisa Wilkinson looks down in wonder at her family tree.
That's amazing.
To find out more, head to sbs.com.au/audio description.
For 43 years of my life, I was in a cult.
Finding our place in the world.
My skin criminalises me.
And fitting in.
I even tried to pick up Australian accent.
Inside, tonight 8:30 on SBS and on demand.
China has passed a national security law that paves the way for the most radical change to the Hong Kong way of life since it returned to Chinese rule 23 years ago. It follows more than a year of anti-government and pro-democracy protests, sparked by a proposed law that would allow extradition to China. The law is expected to allow for life sentences for acts of secession, subversion, terrorism and collusion with foreign forces. Shortly we'll cross live to Hong Kong, but here's how the day unfolded.
Flying Chinese and Hong Kong flags, pro-Beijing supporters celebrate the passing of a national security law. While a small group of anti-government protesters gathered in a shopping mall.
By passing this law, I would say this is like a death certificate of one country, two systems.
China's parliament took only a quarter of an hour to rubber stamp the law, approved unanimously by all 162 members of the Legislative Committee. Hong Kong's Chief Executive Carrie Lam spoke shortly after the law was passed, but refused to directly address it.
Sanctions will not scare us. We are also mentally prepared, and if necessary, the country will take responsive action.
The law, which comes after more than a year of anti-government protests, will be in place from tomorrow, 23 years to the day since Hong Kong's return to Chinese rule. Pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong believes he will be a prime target of the law, which critics believe will crush freedoms in the former British colony. Wong today tweeted that he's quitting as leader of pro-democracy group Demosisto, saying, "If my voice will not be heard soon, I hope that the international community will continue to speak up for Hong Kong and step up concrete efforts to defend our last bit of freedom." There are concerns too over Hong Kong's future as a financial hub, with the legislation putting Beijing on a collision course with other Western governments, including Australia.
If things go south, a lot of Hong Kong residents will, as always, look to migrate to Australia. And this could, be something for, Beijing to hit us over the head with, although we're hit over the head so regularly these days, we probably won't notice.
Details of exactly how the law will work have not been released. Chinese officials are expected to hold a briefing tomorrow. Matt Cannellan, SBS World News.
SBS correspondent Richard Kimber joins us now live from Hong Kong. Good evening, Richard. What's the latest reaction there?
Well, in the hours that followed the passing of this law up in Beijing, here in Hong Kong, there were celebrations from some pro-China groups. They see this, just like the government here, finally as an opportunity to try and stabilise Hong Kong socially and economically after what's been a very tough few months towards the back end of last year and then compounded by the coronavirus in the first half of this year. Also, though, of course, there were opposition groups, pro-democracy groups, still campaigning to try and see if there's a way to oppose this law, even though it's now already been passed. They're calling for large-scale protests. And they're also still asking questions to the chief executive here about exactly how will this bill be implemented in Hong Kong. There are still many questions to be asked, both from the judiciary here, also from public bodies, from business, trying to understand how this bill will actually be implemented in Hong Kong, because it's important to remember the full text of this bill has still not been made public. The chief executive herself has said she still hasn't seen the full text, although by now presumably she might have done, but that's due to be released at some stage on Chinese state media later this afternoon or early evening. So tomorrow there's likely to be a much more detailed question and answer briefing from the chief executive, where some of these questions about how will the bill be actually enforced in Hong Kong will finally be answered. Thank you so much. That's our correspondent Richard Kimber joining us live from Hong Kong.
While most European countries are increasingly confident they have COVID-19 under control, some are using local lockdowns to deal with outbreaks similar to Victoria's announcement today. Leicester in the East Midlands region of England is of particular concern for British authorities. A surge in cases has seen the government impose strict measures that will only apply in the city.
This weekend, pubs and restaurants across England will finally be able to reopen their doors, but not in Leicester.
It's very disappointing. We've been gearing up to reopening, working with health and safety about what we're going to be doing, training staff, everything, and it's just really, really disappointing.
The city of 350,000 people has accounted for 10% of Britain's new COVID cases in the past week, recording 3 times as many infections as the second worst affected region. So the government has declared the UK's first local lockdown, which will see non-essential shops shut once again, while schools will close, having only just reopened. The situation will be reviewed in a fortnight.
I know that this is a worrying time for people living in Leicester, and I want you to know that you have our full support. We do not take these decisions lightly, but with the interests of the people of Leicester in our hearts.
Leicester's mayor isn't entirely convinced the localised restrictions are needed.
The results are indeed higher in Leicester, but that's because they've been doing more testing in Leicester. And that perhaps is a fairly inevitable reflection of what's been happening.
Portugal had been hailed a COVID-19 success story, avoiding the enormous death toll of neighbouring Spain. But there has been a spate of localised outbreaks in recent days, and so 19 districts around Lisbon are going back into lockdown from tomorrow. Patricia Ribeiro is a cleaner. She has no choice but to go to work to make ends meet.
Muita gente. O visita tem medo de apanhar o vírus. Que a minha mãe é acamada, eu tenho medo de levar vírus para casa.
Serbia is also experiencing a surge in cases, having moved from a strict lockdown to a sudden relaxation of social distancing rules. The government now making it mandatory for masks to be worn in enclosed spaces in Belgrade.
Da se nismo pridržavali mjera zaštite I sad se desilo to što se desilo.
The World Health Organization warning that several Balkan countries will find their health systems pushed to the brink if new outbreaks aren't brought under control. Ben Lewis, SBS World News.
An Australian journalist has testified at a congressional committee in the US, which is investigating police actions in a park near the White House earlier this month. It heard the TV news crew was unlawfully attacked when park police began to aggressively clear protesters ahead of a presidential photo opportunity.
They were there to report on anti-racist protests consuming the democratic heart of America.
Exactly what it looks like. We're just standing safely.
Oh! Whoa! But this Australian news crew soon became the story. The scenes were played in front of US lawmakers investigating police actions that day. Channel 7's Amelia Brace reliving the experience.
I can be heard screaming as I was struck by non-lethal projectiles directly to my legs and backside.
She told the congressional committee cameraman Tim Myers was rammed in the chest, his camera punched and she was hit in the back as officers cleared a park near the White House, making way for the president to hold a Bible in front of a church.
We did not hear any warning from law enforcement that the area was to be cleared or that the curfew would be enforced early.
A law professor who also testified criticised the level of force used.
That I thought the attack on the Australian journalists appeared entirely unjustified and unlawful.
But the police were also defended.
The US Park Police were under a state of siege and routinely subject to attack by violent crowds.
The incident that sparked those protests was again in the headlines today as the 4 former Minneapolis police officers accused in the murder of George Floyd fronted court. Watching from the gallery, his aunt and uncle.
I'm sitting 6 feet from a dude that just killed my nephew.
Justice for him is justice for all.
Outrage is also growing over this video showing a couple pointing guns at peaceful protesters marching past their house in Missouri. The couple is now being investigated, but a lawyer for the pair say they were acting out of fear and apprehension and had nothing to do with race. Catalina Flores, SBS World News.
Well, it's just hours until the end of the financial year, and the pandemic, floods and bushfires have ensured a dramatic 6 months. We detail what tax deductions can be claimed. That story coming up shortly. China is forcing birth control onto the minority Uyghur community in a bid to suppress their population, according to an investigation by the Associated Press. The report found evidence of a 4-year campaign to slash birth rates in the northwest Xinjiang region. The Chinese Communist Party denies the allegations, saying they're not based on fact.
Zamret Dawat had 3 children, and for that crime, she was forcibly sterilised.
We lost a part of our body. We lost our identity as women. We will never be able to have children again.
After her 3rd baby, Gulna Omazak, was threatened with being locked up in an internment camp. She had just 3 days to pay a $2,500 fine.
They give shots and remove fetuses forcefully. If they say it's illegal, they make you get an abortion.
The Associated Press's investigation is based on government statistics, state documents and interviews with women. It found the number of IUD contraceptive devices fitted in women had jumped by 60% in Xinjiang province from 200,000 in 2014 to 330,000 in 2018. The birth rate also plummeted by 24% last year compared to 4% nationwide.
The government is fulfilling one of the criteria of the United Nations Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, namely the draconian suppression of minority births.
Nurgal Sawat is part of the Uyghur community in Australia. She wasn't surprised by the report, as members of her family have been forced into abortions for being too young.
It's not an age of 21 yet, and so therefore they've been forced to give an abortion.
She's calling on the Australian government to join the growing push for a United Nations investigation into potential genocide. Foreign Minister Marise Payne says forced birth control or sterilisation is a grave violation of any person's human rights. The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the report is shocking and shows an utter disregard for the sanctity of human life and basic human dignity. British MPs also adding their voices to the growing international outrage. Lucy Murray, SBS World News.
A parliamentary inquiry has forecast a bleak future for the koala unless there's urgent intervention to stop the destruction of habitat. It's found the population in New South Wales faces extinction within 30 years. They were already threatened by climate change, drought and land clearing when thousands were wiped out in the summer bushfires.
They captured hearts of millions around the world during Australia's devastating bushfire season. But while fire is no longer an immediate threat to koalas in New South Wales, experts say their fight for survival remains.
Without urgent government intervention, the koala will become extinct in New South Wales before 2050.
A year-long New South Wales cross-party parliamentary inquiry found koala populations were already in steep decline before the bushfires hit. Habitat loss and fragmentation, the driving factor.
We're already seeing localised extinctions of koalas, and of course the devastation of the bushfires really set them back further.
Among the 42 recommendations made by the committee is the need for a statewide survey of koala numbers. In South Australia, a high-tech koala count is underway on Kangaroo Island after half the population there, at least 25,000, perished in the fires. Conservationists say more needs to be done to protect koala habitat in urban growth areas.
In Eastern Australia, we need stronger laws to protect koala habitat from being bulldozed or logged, chopped down.
The report also says private landowners should be paid to help protect koalas.
Through the committee report, there needs to be more incentives for farmers and landholders to do that. You don't want them to have to, decide that they can make more money by cutting down all of the trees than keeping them and allowing them to do the management.
The New South Wales government says it's already invested a record $44 million to its koala protection strategy and will consider further action after reviewing the report.
I want it to be the premier that saves our koala population into the future, and I think the financial commitment we dedicated, also action on the ground, demonstrates our intent to do that.
Koalas are listed as vulnerable in New South Wales, the ACT and Queensland, with conservationists pushing for them to be reclassified as endangered. Cassandra Bain, SBS World News.
Well, it was a town devastated by the summer's bushfires. Now, residents of Cobargo in New South Wales have urged Prime Minister Scott Morrison to revisit the area, despite the frosty welcome he received during a visit during the crisis. As SBS reporter Pablo Vinales reports, the town will go to the polls this weekend in the Eden-Monaro by-election, with recovery from the fires still a major concern.
The scars from the summer's deadly bushfires still clear to see and etched in the memory of survivor Zoe Salucci McDermott.
The shock and the trauma is very much evident in all of us still, so we've only now just started that recovery.
The mother of two's rental home was destroyed. She made international headlines when Scott Morrison visited the fire-ravaged town in the aftermath.
I'm only shaking your hand if you give more funding to our RFS.
Her message to the Prime Minister today.
So what I would say is come back and see how we're doing healing and recovery-wise, and then go from there.
Though time hasn't healed all her wounds, she's still living in a van with a young family of 4. Father and son Robert and Patrick Solway were killed in the fire that destroyed hundreds of properties in the region. Properties like that of David Wilson from the local post office.
I think we've all been a bit shell-shocked. Some of the money's flowed to some people, not to all people, so I think a little bit flattening.
While many are grateful for the government support they've received so far, they say it's not enough. Mr Morrison's handling of the crisis had been roundly criticised. The summer fires also put pressure on the coalition to take stronger action on climate change. With the by-election on Saturday, it's an issue Liberal candidate Fiona Cotvoys was repeatedly asked about today. She says managing fuel loads is the best way to deal with bushfires.
And the key thing that caused a difference in different places that I could see was hazard reduction.
First the drought, then the bushfires, now the pandemic. While the devastating fires passed 6 months ago, for many here the feeling of sadness is still overwhelming.
There's a lot of depression and there's been some real sad events that have came from the fires, direct results.
It's something the manager of the Cobargo Co-op, Daniel Williamson, has also seen firsthand.
You ask everyone that walks in the door, how you going, Jim? You know, and a lot of times you'll see not good, Dan.
As the recovery slowly continues, this community is starting to see hope on the horizon.
There's a lot of cool stuff happening at the moment in Cobargo as a result of losing almost everything. So there's birth that comes out of it, the destruction of that fire.
Like baby Phoenix, born in April.
I used to call this year, the worst year that's happened so far, but I can't because he's one of the best things to ever happen.
Pablo Vinales, SBS World News.
London-based company NQ Minerals has finalised its purchase of the Beaconsfield gold mine in Tasmania's north. The mine made global headlines in 2006 when it collapsed, killing 1 man and trapping 2 others for 2 weeks. It was shut down in 2012 because of a low gold price at the time. NQ Minerals says it will now refurbish the existing gold processing plant and hopes to have the mine reopened by the end of this year or early next year. This week, we've been shining a light on international students here in Australia and the hardships they're facing, especially during COVID-19. Tonight, we explore the huge shift in learning for students as courses go online and what happens when they ask for a discount on their fees.
Oh, there we go.
Joanna Velasquez doesn't often ask for help, but these days her sustenance depends on the generosity of others.
Thank you. Does that work? Okay.
The international student from Colombia lost her job during the pandemic, but the bills still have to be paid.
we need to pay everything as well, studies and rent, normal life, but without job.
She's studying information technology support, costing almost $5,000 a semester. When the 37-year-old asked for a discount, she was refused.
All the time online, so the quality at the moment is less, and we must pay normal.
The problem with a lack of hands-on teaching is even more apparent for those in more practical courses such as hairdressing and physiotherapy. Lawyer Nick Hanna has been inundated with requests for help.
They appear to be in clear breach of their contracts, as well as possibly in breach of Australian consumer law and the relevant national standards for these education providers.
He provided a template letter for students requesting fee reductions, but most were rejected until his law firm became involved.
It's unfortunate that it took them to receive correspondence from a lawyer to actually abide by the law and provide students with the flexibility that they were otherwise entitled to.
While the International Education Association agrees,
there's no doubt that you can't beat the benefits of face-to-face teaching.
He says education providers are also hurting economically.
Their ability to then offer large discounts, given they're still paying for teaching staff, plus the online teaching platforms, has been compromised as well.
With no government support, this is the reality for many international students in Australia, forced to rely on charity to survive.
Well, we're seeing a new cohort. We're seeing a cohort that's never relied on any form of aid or support or assistance. In fact, the opposite.
But since the pandemic hit, thousands of students have had no other choice. Catalina Flores, SBS World News.
Tomorrow night, our special series on international students continues and focuses on those who work and study and are underpaid. We'll bring you the results from a new survey into wage theft among the vulnerable cohort. Well, there's just a few hours left of the financial year and the ATO is bracing for a flood of claims. SBS Finance Editor Ricardo Gonçalves joins me in the studio with more. Ricardo, of course, it's been a very tough year out there for businesses and workers.
Janice, the Tax Office has released a new Tax Time Essentials online resource to help businesses and workers navigate their claims in the wake of COVID-19, particularly with government payments like JobKeeper.
Now, with the introduction of JobKeeper, it is assessable income for a business, which means it's disclosed with all other business income on the income tax return if you're running a business. And of course, if you're an employee being paid JobKeeper, JobKeeper is going to be included in your gross wages or gross salaries. That's going to be reported through to the ATO via single touch payroll.
The ATO expects working from home claims to soar this year and says it will be cracking down on unsubstantiated work-related expenses over claiming. It's been quite a dramatic financial year, not least for property investors and business owners. Many will be claiming a loss on their properties and many others finding new ways to navigate the tax system amid a stressful 6 months of pandemic, floods and bushfires.
An idyllic getaway on the New South Wales south coast, Bangalay Villas was barely a year old when owner Michelle Bishop hit trouble.
Through the fires and then a brief period with floods really affecting our bookings through February and now with COVID.
Many of the villa's 47 employees were stood down or placed on JobKeeper, the business staying open but facing huge initial drops in patronage, which has since picked up. Now tax time is here. A stressful 6 months comes to a head amid uncertainty for the business and the region.
None of these changes are easy for any business, and I have worked harder and longer hours than I have ever in the past 6 months, and I'm just finding that it is quite tricky to keep on top of it all.
And those tax time stresses in the commercial world have been mirrored in the residential sector. Reduced rents, deferred payment plans and travel restrictions have all slackened demand, and it's expected to complicate negative gearing claims.
If people's rental losses are increasing, then it is likely that they would get a bigger refund than usual, or if they're in a bill situation, a smaller bill than usual.
So what should rental property owners remember this tax time? Well, you should only include rent as income when it's paid. So if it's been deferred for your tenants, don't report it. If you've lowered the rent, you can still claim expenses as long as the reduction is in line with market conditions. If you have insurance that covers loss of income, it's still assessable on your tax return. If you've deferred mortgage repayments, the interest charged is still a tax deduction. And for short-term rentals, where existing bookings have been affected, deductions are still available.
People who own a short-term rental property, the most important thing to remember is people can claim deductions for those properties, provided that the property is still genuinely available for rent.
And the final piece of tax advice, keep records. Darren Mara, SBS World News.
Today marks the end of a volatile financial year for our share market. The 200 slowly hit a record high in February, up around 7% since July 2019. But the coronavirus pandemic saw one of the hardest and fastest corrections our share market has ever seen. And since that low point, shares have recovered nearly 30%, making for the best quarter since 2009. But for the year, the market is down 10.9%. Analysts say the continuing COVID-19 fallout and the US election, whatever the outcome, will create broader market headwinds in the new financial year.
So we are coming into a world, I believe, of lower returns and higher risk. And so the challenge for investors is actually figuring out how they can, get away from broad-based equity exposures and perhaps start to zero in more precise thematics. So, the challenge is, how do I get exposure to risk markets, but also how do I diversify that risk should things take a turn for the worse?
Despite that 11% fall on the local share market, the median superannuation growth fund is expected to return just negative 1.3% over the last 12 months. That's according to Chant West, and that's the first annual contraction since the global financial crisis.
The majority of super fund members can afford to remain patient. Even older members, in most cases, don't take their money out at retirement as a lump sum. So their money remains in the superannuation system for a lot longer than they think, and it moves into the pension phase.
So by the close, the 200 rose 1.4%, but it was 2.5% stronger just before that news of reimposed lockdown measures were announced in parts of Melbourne. The banks did well, so too the miners. Qantas climbed as Queensland reopened its borders to most of the country. Property stocks fell. The Australian dollar lost a bit of ground against the greenback and is buying 68.56 US. And tomorrow we'll take a closer look at the movement in property prices since the onset of COVID-19. Janice.
Plenty of interest there. Thanks so much, Ricardo. Well, coming up next.
He is the real-life version of Hannibal Lecter.
A sadistic serial killer admits a reign of terror that lasted 40 years. And turmoil in the AFL. Will players relocate under a disrupted schedule?
I am out of my comfort zone, well and truly.
This is where it gets exciting.
This is where it gets really exciting.
He goes to the Crimean War.
Wow.
Julie Bishop in Who Do You Think You Are? Tonight, 7:30 on SBS and On Demand.
Join me, Rove McManus, for Australia's first ever televised life drawing class with nude models, amateur artists and a bunch of special guests. Watch or draw along from home. It doesn't matter if you're a passionate Picasso or a stick figure specialist. All you need is pencil, paper and a little artistic licence. It's a masterpiece.
Life Drawing Live, Saturday 8:30 on SBS and On Demand.
Pay less every day at The Good Guys. $200 off this Sony TV. This Hisense fridge only $445. This Samsung soundbar only $349. And this NutriBullet only $69. Plus, loads more only at The Good Guys.
The Amazon mid-year sale ends Tuesday. Get in quick to save on great deals across electronics, fashion, homewares and more. Plus, you'll get free delivery on eligible orders over $39. Shop amazon.com.au. Easy as.
No time for a headache? Try Panadol Rapid from Chemist Warehouse. It's absorbed 2 times faster than regular Panadol tablets. Panadol Rapid 40 caplets is $6.99. So for pain relief, choose Panadol Rapid. Live, look, feel well at Chemist Warehouse.
4 out of 5 people who are blind don't need to be. A simple $25 surgery can restore sight. Please donate today to help carry on Fred's vision.
Every eye is an eye.
Getting back on the road is something we're all looking forward to. And at Toyota, we're here to help you do just that. Our dealerships are still open and we have a range of finance options that can help you get behind the wheel of your new car.
Get Corolla Hatch Ascent Sport Petrol from $96 per week and 3.9% finance with Toyota Access. Visit your local dealer to find out more. Oh, what a feeling. Toyota.
They wanted to wipe us from the face of the earth. We kept asking ourselves, why?
I'm trying to keep us alive.
War of the Worlds starts Thursday, 9th of July on SBS and on demand.
Tonight on Where Are You Really From? The Greek history of Darwin.
Oh! We came here, we grew up here, so never mind what's happened, we'll still be here.
Where Are You Really From? Tonight, 9:30 on SBS and on demand.
The man known as the Golden State Killer has admitted to 13 murders and nearly 50 rapes. Former police officer Joseph D'Angelo committed the crimes across California in the 1970s and 80s before being captured 2 years ago.
Tonight, the feeble man in that orange jumpsuit hoarsely confessing.
I admit.
James D'Angelo Jr., 74, admitting in a plea deal he's the Golden State Killer, one of the most sadistic and elusive serial killers in history.
Encompassing 13 known murders and almost 50 rapes between 1975 and 1986.
One after another, prosecutors from 11 counties reading the counts, and with so many victims and survivors, the hearing had to be moved to a ballroom with a 2,000-seat capacity. But in a powerful moment, his victims, known as Jane Does, defiantly standing up in court to face D'Angelo. During his reign of terror, D'Angelo would taunt police and his victims with phone calls long after the attacks. He was captured living in plain sight in 2018.
We found the needle in the haystack, and it was right here in Sacramento.
Investigators linking DNA from a door handle and a discarded tissue to decades-old crime scene DNA. Just before the hearing, survivors huddling together.
Does it give you any satisfaction to see him up there admitting to these crimes?
Huge amount of satisfaction. I'm pretty overwhelmed, so I don't have a whole lot of great words right now, but yes.
And by pleading guilty tonight, D'Angelo spared himself the death penalty. Now, all those survivors who stood up when his crimes against them were read out in court, they will have a chance to confront him during the August sentencing when they can read their victim impact statements.
Kosovo's president has promised to resign if his indictment for alleged war crimes is confirmed. Hashim Thaci says there's no evidence he broke the law during or after a 1998-99 armed conflict between ethnic Albanian separatists and Serbia. Mr Thaci was a commander of the Kosovo Liberation Army that fought for independence from Serbia in a conflict that left more than 10,000 dead.
In the following days, I will consult with the political leaders about the next steps. I assure you again, I will not face justice from this office. If the accusation is confirmed, I will immediately resign as your president and face the accusations.
Last week, a prosecutor based in The Hague said he had indicted Mr Thaci, former Speaker Kadri Vesi and a group of other former independence fighters. Boeing's 737 MAX has begun test flights after 2 deadly crashes saw the aircraft grounded last year. In all, 346 people died in Indonesia and Ethiopia when the 737's flight control system malfunctioned. The news comes as Norwegian Air cancelled orders for 97 Boeing aircraft and began a compensation claim related to the plane's grounding. The captain of defending AFL premiers Richmond say there's a genuine chance some players won't move interstate to help complete the season. The league is yet to decide how it'll proceed with its schedule beyond next week. It follows a tightening of border restrictions in South Australia and Queensland that could force the competition's 10 Victorian teams to relocate to another state.
It's going to be a challenge, you know, that every person within our footy club, no doubt our footy club will be there and want to partake and do what we need to do to continue the season.
The AFL Players Association believes players that opt against travelling to a hub should still be paid by their club. Coming up, the weather details and lonely ski fields. The snow has come, but the tourists have not.
I am out of my comfort zone, well and truly.
This is where it gets exciting.
This is where
it gets really exciting.
He goes to the Crimean War.
Wow. Julie Bishop in Who Do You Think You Are? Next on SBS.
In a brand new series, take an unprecedented look at those fighting for permanent residency.
Are we going to win? I don't know.
Who Gets to Stay in Australia starts tomorrow 8:30 on SBS and on demand.
In darkness, keep your light on, for the shadows they move. I'll keep you safe from harm.
Give in to fresh. Give in to Subway.
My best piece of advice for consumers is...
don't buy it if you don't need it.
Do your homework. There's a lot of information out there. Some of it's not very good.
read your instruction manuals.
Think hard about what you do and don't need. Realise that there are a lot of people out there who are trying to sell you something you don't need. And seek out those independent voices. Choice is one of those.
Become a Choice member. We can save you so much money, we can save you time, and we can save you heartache.
We finally got this home for our family. We need to protect it all no matter what.
Well, I've read some reviews and think we should do one simple thing and get real life insurance.
With real life insurance, your family would receive a cash payment from $100,000 up to $1 million if you passed away. And our claims process is as stress-free as possible with our award-winning Australian-based team. Call 137 025 or search Real Life Insurance.
Easy on yourself.
You're an enemy?
No, I'm an informer. Sweet dreams, Mr. Bernard.
For 43 years of my life, I was in a cult.
Finding our place in the world.
My skin criminalises me.
And fitting in.
I even tried to pick up Australian accent.
Inside, tonight 8:30 on SBS and on demand.
There's a world of stories available for free at SBS On Demand. Download the app or visit the website today. SBS On Demand, a world of difference.
To the weather details now, and a cold front is moving across southern parts of Victoria and South Australia. Patchy cloud covers parts of the eastern seaboard due to a moist onshore wind from east of Bass Strait. In the major centres, it'll be wet in Perth, overnight showers to hit Melbourne, windy in Adelaide, partly cloudy in Brisbane, sunny skies for Sydney, Darwin and Hobart, and foggy in Canberra. Further afield, partly cloudy in Noumea, windy in Wellington and Christchurch, showers in Nundy and Samoa. To Southeast Asia, thunder in Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur and Singapore, rain in Phnom Penh, Port Moresby and Honiara. Let's head further north. Drizzle in Shanghai, rain in Hanoi and Taipei, scattered showers in Hong Kong. Heading west, clear skies in Baghdad, Beirut and Jerusalem, thunder in Delhi, rain for Mumbai, partly cloudy in Islamabad. To Europe now, sunny in Athens, Madrid and Warsaw, some showers in Stockholm and London. And to Africa, wet in Addis Ababa, thunder in Lagos, partly cloudy skies in Dakar and Nairobi. In South America, thunderstorms in Panama City, drizzle in Buenos Aires and Lima, rain for Bogota. And for North America, foggy in LA, wet in Washington DC, Toronto and Mexico City. Well, snow has come to the town of Bariloche in Argentina's region of Patagonia, but the tourists have not. The abundant snowfall coinciding with what would have been the beginning of the ski season. A strict quarantine because of COVID-19, meaning tourism activity, which represents 75% of the local economy, is at a virtual standstill. Local authorities expect the industry may restart in late September. Recapping our top stories now, and Victoria has issued lockdown orders to 10 postcodes in a drastic attempt to control Melbourne's coronavirus emergency. There have been 312 cases in the last 7 days, mainly community transmissions. From the 10th of July, Queensland will reopen its borders to all residents except Victorians. South Australia has scrapped its planned reopening. China has passed a national security law which poses the most radical change to the Hong Kong way of life since it returned to Chinese rule 23 years ago. That is the world this Tuesday. If you missed some of tonight's bulletin, you can always catch up on the SBS News website shortly. And a reminder, you can also watch the bulletin live there or on our app. Ricardo Gonçalves will be back with our next bulletin just after 10:30 tonight. Good night.
This program proudly brought to you by Ancestry. Find the answers with Ancestry.
This episode of Who Do You Think You Are was recorded before social distancing measures and travel restrictions came into place.